handbag. Ancient Sumerians were more than familiar with handbags, or perhaps objects that modern people perceive as such.
The Sumerians carved it into stone over 5,000 years ago, and they were not the first. A rigid container with a curved handle, identical to a modern handbag, gripped by beings who were not supposed to exist. Winged, eagle-headed, fish-bodied, always holding the same object, and every ancient culture that depicted it made the same quiet decision afterward. They stopped showing what was inside. Not once, not anywhere. Across 12,000 years of carvings, across 3 continents, the bag stays closed because what was inside it was never meant to be seen. And the reason why is darker than you think, the object that should not exist. Mainstream archaeology has spent a century explaining this away. A bucket, a pouch, a ritual container, nothing to look at here, move along, but the pattern does not hold. The object appears in places that should share nothing with each other. It is carried by figures that multiple ancient cultures describe in almost identical terms, and the deeper you follow the trail, the more it starts to look like someone at some point decided the truth about this object was too dangerous to pass down. This is the mystery of the handbag of the gods, and what was inside it was never meant to be seen. In the ancient ruins of what was once the cradle of civilization, carved into stone tablets that have survived for thousands of years, there is an image archaeologists cannot fully explain. Towering figures dominate the scenes. Some have wings. Some have the features of eagles. Some have the bodies of fish. They wear elaborate headdresses. They perform what appear to be sacred rituals. And in their hands, gripped with unmistakable purpose, they carry something that looks shockingly familiar. It looks like a handbag, not a rough pouch, not a simple sack, a structured, rigid container with a curved handle, identical in proportion to something you might see on a modern city street. The same object appears again and again across Mesopotamian art held by beings ancient texts describe as the teachers of humanity, the ones who gave us writing, mathematics, agriculture, and law. For decades, mainstream archaeology has offered a clean explanation. It is a bucket of miles and thousands of years. In Turkey, at a site so old it predates the supposed invention of civilization by 7,000 years. In Mexico, carved by cultures with no known contact with the ancient Middle East, in Maui myths, in ancient Egyptian symbolism, in traditions scattered across the globe, the same object, the same shape, the same association with divine beings who brought knowledge to humanity. Either this is the most remarkable coincidence in the history of archaeology, or something else is going on. The teachers of humanity. The story begins in ancient Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates in what is now modern Iraq. This is where human civilization is said to have begun. The first cities, the first writing, the foundation of human progress emerged from this region roughly 6,000 years ago. The Sumerians built the first of these civilizations. They left behind thousands of clay tablets in uniform script, documenting their laws, their commerce, their literature, and their beliefs. Buried inside those beliefs is a class of beings almost nobody outside of Assyria has ever heard of. The Apkal. The Apkal were not ordinary humans. They were sages, semi-divine figures who served as intermediaries between the gods and mankind. Ancient texts describe them as the ones who brought civilization to humanity after a great flood had destroyed the previous world. They taught humans how to build cities, how to cultivate crops, how to write and calculate. They were the founders of everything we call civilization. In Mesopotamian art, the Akalu appear in several forms. Some are winged men in elaborate robes, others have the heads of eagles, and some are depicted as fishermen. That last form connects to one of the strangest figures in all of ancient mythology. Ons. According to the Babylonian priest Berossus, writing in the 3rd century BCE but drawing on much older sources, Ons emerged from the Persian Gulf in ancient times. He had the body of a fish, but beneath his fish head was another head, a human one. He had human feet emerging from his fishtail. During the day, he came onto land and taught humans writing, sciences, arts, agriculture, law, and city building. At night, he returned to the sea. Ons and the Agkalu represent the same concept, divine beings who gave humanity the knowledge to build civilization. They appear throughout Mesopotamian art for thousands of years, and almost always they are carrying the handbag. Before you keep watching, before we go deeper, if this investigation is pulling you in, take a second to subscribe and hit the bell. It genuinely helps us keep digging into these forgotten corners of history. And drop a comment right now with your best guess about what was inside that bag, because what comes next is going to make your first guess feel a lot less certain. The problem with the bucket theory: they are carrying these things that people call handbags, but in reality, they are not handbags in this instance. They are buckets. The official explanation has a name: the bandudu, a ritual bucket used in purification ceremonies. The Appkalu are often depicted holding a cone-shaped object in their other hand, which archaeologists interpret as a ritual applicator used to sprinkle water or oil during sacred rites. The bucket held the liquid. The cone applied it. A tool for fertility or purification, nothing more. And on paper, it holds together. Ritual purification was central to Mesopotamian religion. The bucket and cone imagery does appear in contexts that suggest religious ceremony. If you want the simplest explanation, the bandu is it. But three problems refuse to go away. First, the figures carrying these objects are not ordinary priests. They are the Appkalu, the beings credited with founding civilization itself. They are depicted alongside the Tree of Life, one of the most sacred symbols in Mesopotamian cosmology. They appear in the throne rooms of kings, in the most important religious spaces. Would the beings who gave humanity writing, mathematics, and law really be remembered for carrying water buckets? Would the symbol most connected to the founders of civilization be nothing more than a janitor's tool? Second, the object itself does not look like a bucket. Buckets in ancient art typically have wider mouths or visible contents. The Mesopotamian handbag has a rigid, structured appearance, a curved handle designed for carrying, not pouring. The proportions are wrong for a bucket, but perfect for a container meant to hold something precious, portable, something you would never want to spill. And third, most damaging of all, the same symbol appears in places where Mesopotamian ritual practices could not possibly have influenced the artwork. This is where the mystery stops being a quirk of Mesopotamian religion and becomes something much stranger. The site that rewrote the timeline. In southeastern Turkey, on a dry hilltop locals had ignored for centuries, archaeologists uncovered the most disruptive find of the last 100 years: go tape. Massive stone pillars arranged in circles, decorated with elaborate carvings of animals, symbols, and human figures. A complex ceremonial site built with planning and purpose, and it is more than 12,000 years old. Read that again. 12,000 years. This date breaks everything. Göbekli predates the supposed invention of agriculture by at least 1,000 years. It predates pottery. It predates permanent settlements. It predates everything we thought was necessary for humans to build monumental architecture. According to the standard timeline, the people who built it should have been primitive hunter-gatherers, small bands with stone tools barely surviving the end of the Ice Age. They should not have had the organization or technical knowledge to construct massive stone monuments decorated with sophisticated artwork. And yet, there it is. Impossible according to everything we thought we knew. And here is where it gets stranger. Among the carvings of Göbekli on those massive stone pillars is the handbag symbol. The same structured container, the same curved handle, the same proportions. This is not a bucket for Mesopotamian purification rituals. Göbekli was built at least 7,000 years before Sumerian civilization existed. Whatever this symbol meant to the people who carved it into those pillars, it had nothing to do with bandidu, nothing to do with Mesopotamian religion at all. So what was it, and why? 7,000 years later, did the Sumerians carve the exact same object into the hands of their sacred teachers, as if it had always been part of the story? The same symbol on the other side of the world. The mystery gets worse when you leave the Middle East entirely. In Mexico, at the ancient Olm site of La Venta, there is a stone monument known as Stala 19. Carved roughly 3,000 years ago, it depicts a figure scholars have nicknamed the ambassador. He wears elaborate ceremonial dress and appears to be interacting with a feathered serpent, one of the most important symbols in all of Mesoamerican religion. And in his hand, he carries what appears to be the exact same handbag. Theme had no contact with ancient Mesopotamia. None. They developed on the opposite side of the world, separated by an ocean no one was supposed to cross until thousands of years later. Their writing system, their calendar, their religious beliefs, all developed independently from Middle Eastern civilization. And yet, there it is, the same shape, the same rigid structure, the same curved handle. The Toltec civilization, which came later, depicted similar objects as well. Figures at the ancient city of Tula carry handbag-like containers in poses that echo the Mesopotamian akalu almost perfectly. The conventional explanation would be coincidence, but that explanation collapses the moment you look at the specific contexts where the handbag appears. It is never associated with ordinary carrying. It is never shown being used for everyday tasks. It is always in the hands of divine beings, always linked to the origins of knowledge, always tied to the moment civilization itself began. In Ma tradition from New Zealand, there is a myth about 3 baskets of knowledge. The god Tain ascended to the highest heaven and obtained 3 core baskets containing different types of wisdom, divine beings, baskets, knowledge that founded civilization. The parallels are almost impossible to ignore. In ancient Egypt, the Ankh symbol representing life and divine power has been compared by some researchers to the handbag shape. The gods are frequently depicted holding the Ankh by its loop, in a pose almost identical to how the Akalu hold their handbags. What we are looking at across multiple continents and multiple millennia is a pattern. Divine beings associated with the origins of civilization and knowledge carrying a distinctive container. Random coincidence should produce random variation. Different cultures should associate their knowledge bringers with different objects. Instead, we get the same basic symbol repeated across cultures that supposedly had no contact with each other. Either multiple civilizations independently invented the same specific symbol for the same specific concept, or there is a connection mainstream archaeology has refused to see. Which leads to the question researchers have been circling for decades. What was inside the bag? The 4 theories. The most conservative theory is that the handbag represented a seed bank. After the catastrophic end of the last ice age, survivors of the cataclysm would have needed to restart agriculture in a devastated landscape. A portable container holding preserved seeds and agricultural knowledge would have been priceless, the single most valuable possession a survivor could carry. This fits the timeline exactly. The Basepa was built right at the end of the Ice Age during the period when agriculture was supposedly first emerging. Bekalu were credited with teaching humanity farming techniques. If the handbag held the seeds and knowledge needed to restart civilization after a global catastrophe, its sacred status makes perfect sense. But some researchers believe it held something more advanced than seeds. The second theory proposes the object was a portable power source. This comes from a question mainstream archaeology has never really answered. How did ancient peoples build what they built with the technology they supposedly had? The massive stones at Göbekli, the surgical precision of Mesopotamian architecture. It all points to capabilities we cannot account for. If the handbag contained a technology that could manipulate matter or energy in ways we do not understand, it would explain both the object's sacred status and its association with the beings who taught humanity to build. The knowledge bringers were not just carrying information, they were carrying the tools to make it real. The third theory is more speculative. The handbag contained a genetic toolkit. Ancient texts from multiple cultures describe the gods creating or modifying humanity, shaping humans for specific purposes. The Sumerian creation myths describe the gods fashioning humans from clay mixed with divine blood. Similar themes appear in traditions worldwide. What if those myths preserved a memory of actual genetic modification? What if the handbag held the technology used to upgrade human capabilities, to transform primitive hominids into beings capable of civilization? It would explain why the object was so precious, why it was tied to the origins of humanity. And then there are the theories almost nobody wants to sit with for too long. Some researchers propose the handbag was a consciousness device, a technology designed to expand human awareness. The pineal gland has been associated with spiritual experiences across many cultures, and ancient Mesopotamian art includes imagery some interpret as direct references to it. If the handbag contained a technology that could stimulate the pineal gland, it would explain the connection between these objects and divine knowledge. The knowledge bringers were not just teaching information, they were upgrading human consciousness itself. The final theory is the one almost no serious academic will touch on the record, that the handbag was a reality projector, a device that could influence the very structure of reality itself. This theory borrows from quantum physics and simulation theory, suggesting that what we perceive as physical reality might be far more malleable than we assume. Ancient myths from multiple cultures describe the gods creating the world through divine words, divine intent. What if those myths preserved a memory of a technology that could literally shape reality? What if the handbag was the device used to program the world we live in? These theories range from plausible to absurd, but one thing unites every single one. The handbag represents something more significant than a ritual bucket. Whatever was inside, it was important enough to be carved alongside the founders of civilization, important enough to appear in sacred contexts across multiple cultures, important enough to survive in human memory for more than 12,000 years. Why did the symbol disappear? If the handbag was so important, there is one question the official narrative has never answered.